In 1969, the United States Navy commissioned a training evolution so brutal that doctors were brought on site not to help candidates, but to decide when to pull them out before they died. Over 5.5 days, men would be given roughly 4 hours of sleep total. They would run more than 200 miles on foot. They would paddle rubber boats through freezing surf in the middle of the night. They would spend hours submerged in 5-degree ocean water until their core temperature dropped to dangerous levels. And they had to do all of this while being actively sleep-deprived, physically broken, and psychologically attacked by the instructors whose entire job was to make them quit. About 75% do. The ones who don't become Navy SEALs. But the question that nobody really asks is how, not why. How? How does a human body function for nearly 6 days on almost no sleep, almost no food, and maximum physical stress? And what happens inside a person's brain when it's pushed that far? That's what this video is about. Here's how it actually works. To understand Hell Week, you first need to understand what Navy SEAL training is built on. The program is called Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training, or BUD-S, and it runs for roughly 6 months. Candidates go through 3 phases covering diving, weapons, and land warfare. But before any of that, there's an introductory period called First Phase. And inside First Phase, roughly 5 weeks in, is Hell Week. The timing is deliberate. By that point, candidates have already been through weeks of conditioning. They're fit. They know the drills. They understand what's expected. Hell Week isn't designed to test whether they're in shape. It's designed to test whether they'll keep going when their body is telling them to stop. It officially begins on a Sunday night, usually around 10 p.m., with something the instructors call breakout. Without warning, the training compound erupts. Simulated explosions. Machine gun fire over trainees' heads. Flares lighting up the beach. Instructors screaming from every direction. Candidates who were moments earlier sleeping in their racks are suddenly in cold ocean water, crawling through sand, and being told they have 30 seconds to be somewhere else. This is intentional. The chaos serves a purpose. The instructors are trying to overwhelm the nervous system before it has a chance to prepare. A person who has time to think about Hell Week will build up resistance. A person who is thrown into it at 10 p.m. on a Sunday night has no time to do anything but react. From that moment forward, candidates will not be allowed to sleep for 5.5 days. The physical demands are almost impossible to list completely, but a few numbers give the picture. Candidates run a total of roughly 200 miles over the course of the week, which works out to about 35 to 40 miles per day. They paddle inflatable rubber boats, called IBSs, for miles through open ocean swells. They do the exercises the instructors at BUD-S call sugar cookies, which means running into the surf, getting completely soaked, and then rolling in the sand until every inch of their body is covered. Then doing it again and again. They do this while carrying equipment, while their teammates' performances affect their own outcomes, and while instructors are actively looking for any sign of weakness, confusion, or hesitation. The cold is its own category. The water temperature off Coronado Island, where BUD-S is conducted, typically sits between 55 and 65 degrees Fahrenheit. That is well below the threshold at which hypothermia begins to develop in an adult human body. Candidates spend large portions of Hell Week either in the water or soaking wet in cold air. The condition is called cold and wet, and instructors use it strategically because nothing degrades physical and mental performance quite as fast. Doctors from the Naval Medical Center are present throughout the week. Their job is to monitor candidates and intervene when a trainee's core temperature drops to a level that is genuinely dangerous. The line between deliberately uncomfortable and medically harmful is one they walk continuously. But the real story of Hell Week is not the cold, and it's not the miles. The real story is sleep, and what the brain does when it doesn't get any. By day 2, most candidates are experiencing what researchers who have studied military sleep deprivation describe as a predictable progression of cognitive decline. Short-term memory starts to fragment. Decision-making slows. The brain begins to have difficulty separating what's real from what it's filling in from memory or imagination. By day 3, many candidates begin hallucinating. This is documented, not rumored, not exaggerated. Multiple SEAL training instructors and candidates who have written about the experience describe the same thing. Trees that appear to move, boats that look like animals, full conversations with people who aren't there. Former SEAL Howard Wasden described in his memoir seeing a construction crew working on the beach during Hell Week. There was no construction crew. The brain, when denied sleep for long enough, will start generating its own sensory inputs. It doesn't stop trying to process the world, it just starts making things up to fill the gaps. And the candidates have to keep going anyway. This is where the nutrition side of the story becomes important, because the Navy actually learned hard lessons about this over the decades. Early versions of Hell Week were so aggressive with caloric restriction that candidates were being permanently injured at rates that were unsustainable. The program was adjusted. Today, candidates during Hell Week consume somewhere between 7,000 and 8,000 calories per day. For reference, the average adult male burns roughly 2,000 to 2,500 calories per day in normal conditions. A candidate running 35 miles, paddling for hours in cold water, and operating in near-freezing surf burns multiples of that. The caloric intake is high, but it still doesn't fully replace what the body is spending. Meals are hot, and they're given at roughly 6-hour intervals. This is one of the few breaks from the physical evolution, and the instructors are deliberate about it for a reason. A candidate whose blood sugar collapses completely is not a training challenge, they're a medical emergency. The goal is to keep candidates in a state of severe deprivation without crossing into organ failure. The food also serves a psychological function. When candidates are deep in day 3 or day 4, the promise of the next hot meal is sometimes the only near-term positive thing they have to focus on. It's a small loop. Get through the next 2 hours, eat. Get through the next 2 hours, eat. Small loops are how most candidates survive Hell Week psychologically, and this is something that researchers studying military resilience have documented extensively. The ones who quit are often the ones who try to mentally process the entire week at once. The ones who make it are usually the ones who reduce their mental horizon to something manageable. Not 5 days. Not today. The next evolution. The next meal. The next time, they can sit down for 30 seconds. Former SEALs who have spoken publicly about this describe it almost identically. Marcus Luttrell, in his account of training, talked about breaking things down to the point where he wasn't thinking about Hell Week at all, just the specific thing directly in front of him. 1 paddle stroke. 1 step. 1 more minute in the water. This sounds simple. It is not simple when your brain is sleep deprived, your body temperature is dropping, your muscles are failing from overuse, and an instructor is 6 inches from your face screaming that you should quit. The instructors are allowed to offer candidates a way out at almost any point. There is a brass bell mounted at the training compound. Ring it 3 times, place your helmet on the ground, and you're done. It's over. You can go inside, get warm, sleep, eat. The pressure to ring that bell is constant, and the instructors apply it deliberately. What makes Hell Week particularly brutal psychologically is that quitting is always presented as the rational choice. Instructors don't shame candidates for considering it. They make it sound reasonable. They'll tell a candidate with a stress fracture that they've proved what they needed to prove. They'll tell a candidate who hasn't slept in 90 hours that there's no shame in recognizing their limits. The offer of relief is always there. The bell is always within reach. This is the psychological design. The question isn't whether a candidate can endure pain. Most people can endure a lot of pain if they know it has a defined end. The question is whether a candidate will keep going when quitting is actively being offered as the intelligent, adult, non-shameful option. If you've made it this far and want more deep dives like this, subscribe. We cover military stories and elite units every week. The ones who stay do so for reasons that turn out to matter more than physical fitness. Multiple studies examining what distinguishes completers from non-completers in military selection programs point to the same variables. Not strength, not baseline fitness scores. The factors that consistently predict who stays are mental resilience markers, specifically the ability to tolerate ambiguity, the tendency to use what psychologists call approach-oriented coping rather than avoidance-oriented coping, and the willingness to ask for help from teammates rather than trying to carry everything alone. That last one is counterintuitive given how Hell Week is usually framed in popular culture. The image is the lone warrior grinding through alone. But S candidates don't operate alone. They operate in boat crews. Everything is done as a unit. Your boat crew's time is your time. Your boat crew's failure affects your position in line. The social structure is deliberately designed to make individual suffering a collective problem. Candidates who mentally isolate, who decide internally that they're going to outlast this on their own, tend to break faster. Candidates who stay engaged with their teammates, who focus energy outward instead of inward, who help the person next to them when they themselves are struggling, tend to last longer. There is a night in Hell Week that most completers describe as the single hardest point. It's called Wednesday night, sometimes called the witching hour. By that point, candidates have been awake for more than 60 hours. The hallucinations are frequent. The body's ability to regulate temperature has been significantly degraded. The instructors know this is the window when the most candidates quit, so they increase the pressure. Cold water exposure gets longer. Evolutions get more confusing. The instructors will sometimes issue contradictory orders, not by accident, but to test whether a candidate can function when nothing makes sense. Most of the quitting during Hell Week happens in 2 windows. The first night, when the shock of it is overwhelming, and Wednesday night, when the accumulated damage finally exceeds a person's reserves. The candidates who survive Wednesday night almost always finish. When Hell Week officially ends, it doesn't end with a speech or a ceremony. It typically ends with the lead instructor telling candidates to secure their gear and go eat. That's it. The transition from the worst experience of their lives to standing in a chow line happens in about 90 seconds. The physical recovery from Hell Week takes weeks. Stress fractures, tendon damage, and trench foot are common. Candidates often lose 10 to 20 pounds over the course of the week. Sleep deprivation at that level takes the body several weeks of normal sleep cycles to fully recover from. And some research suggests that certain cognitive functions remain below baseline for longer than that. But the candidates who finish Hell Week don't stop training. There are still months of S ahead of them. Then there's SEAL qualification training after that. Then years of operational experience before they're considered truly combat ready. Hell Week is not the end. It's proof of concept. It answers one specific question that no fitness test, no psychological evaluation, and no interview can answer. When this person is broken, when they're cold and sleep deprived and hallucinating and being offered a warm bed and a way out, do they stay? The ones who ring the bell are not weak. Most of them are extraordinarily fit people who made a rational calculation under extreme conditions. The ones who stay have demonstrated something different, and it has almost nothing to do with how much they can bench press. That's why Hell Week exists the way it does. Not to identify the strongest bodies, to identify the people who will keep going when nothing about the situation is asking them to. There's another one on screen if you're not done yet.